start with our class of Public Administration, BPAC 131, Perspective on Public Administration. In this, we had gone through Block 1, Conceptual and Classical Perspective, in which we had studied concept and significance in public administration. Second, we had gone through scientific management approach, then administrative management approach, bureaucratic approach. A scientific management approach, which was introduced by F.W. Taylor, in his theory believed that in order to improve the functioning of the organization, scientific principles needed to be applied like training in a set procedure. Next was the improvement of organization. The main element of his objectives were management oriented, in which logical positivism made in administration management. This was by the Henry Furr administrative approach. Next was bureaucratic approach. Max Weber was the foremost thinker of modern bureaucracy, but J.S. Mill, G.W.F. Fagel were also there, whose comparative discussion on bureaucracy, in which it applies that direct work of government and sometimes refer to bureaucracy as the actual governor. Weber identified two types of domains, namely traditional and charismatic bureaucracy. This we had done in the first uh, block. Now, in the second block, behavioral system and socio psychological perspective, we had studied human relation approach by Elton Mayo, which focused on managers taking more of the interest in workers' training, treating them as people who have worthwhile opinion, and realizing that workers enjoy interacting together. His theory most closely fits in with a practiced style of management. Now, in the this was the human relation approach. Next was the decision making approach. Decision making is the process through which one optimum choice is made for several possible alternatives to solution for a given solution that will ensure maximum benefit and least risk that the others which were not selected. Now, in the decision making approach, four decision making models were there: rational model, bounded rationality, intuitive rationality. Now, in rational, information on was there on the alternative can be gathered and qualified. Second, trying to maximize your outcome was in the rational model. Bounded rationality it was used in you do not have or you are not willing to invert much time in making the decision. The minimum criteria are clear. An intuitive model goals are under clear and unclear. We have experience with the form of intuitions or your experience, your knowledge. Now, intuitive model, there is time pressure and analysis paralysis would be costly. In the intuitive creative model has solutions to the problem are not clearly. New solutions need to be generated. You have time to immerse yourself in the issues. Now, these were the concepts we had discussed in the second block. Now we will go further in the second block, that is the model of decision making. There are various models in decision making. Almost all the models highlights the importance of rationality of individual or the organization that is involved in making a decision. Some of the important models of decision making aspects forwarded by key scholars are as follows. Now, Simon bounded rationality model, with Simon work on administrative behavior in 1957, is this Simon work in the field of decision making. He believed that the rationality model in decision making is not realistic and its principles are not attainable according to him. Rationality is concerned with the selection of preferred behavior alternative in terms of some system of values whereby the consequences of behavior can be evaluated. This is required that firstly the decision maker should have knowledge about all the variable alternatives. Secondly, the decision maker should also be able to anticipate the consequences of each of the alternatives. He has classified rationality into various types in which decision should be taken. Now, by Simon, objective rational, there were four types actually in the rational model. One was the objective rational. It is correctly behave of the maximizing given value in a given subject or in a given solution or situation. Second was the subjectively rational. The decision maximizes attainment reactive to knowledge of the subject. And third was the consciously rational, in which adjustment of needs to end is a conscious process. Next, deliberately rational. It means the meal to the ends and has been deliberately brought about. These were the four rational models by the Simon's bounded rational model. Next was the organizationally rational unit of the organization goals, in which organization sets a specific goal. Next was the personal rational, in which direct at the individual goals. Means the individual goals were there to be seen. While discussing the concept of bounded rationality, Simon also developed the concept of satisfying. The term satisfying is derived from the word satisfaction and sufficient. Justification and decisions allow a problem solver to achieve his or her main goal, but the process does not involve a comprehensive analysis of all possibilities and outcome, nor does it require perfect information. The following factors are responsible for bounded rationality, leading to satisfying decision, which includes that the dynamic matter of organizational objective. The organization should have a very dynamic objectives to be fulfilled. Imperfect information as well as limited capacity to process the available information should be there. Time and cost constraint, environmental focus on external factors. Next, the decision makers may not be aware of all the possible alternatives available and their consequences. These was the uh, decision included in the Simon's rational model. Now, next was the personal factors like pre-convenience, notions, habit, etc. was also there. Organizational factors like procedures, rules, channels of communication, and so on. Administrative man is concerned about taking satisfying decisions, while the common man is concerned about maximizing decision. This was the Simon rational model. Next was the Lindemann's incremental model. Now, incremental model, Charles E. Lindemann is in his article, The Science of Mudding Through 1959, had advocated the concept of incremental model or decision making incremental model, in which it is completely critical and against Simon's rational model. This argument is that the actual process of decision making is entirely different from the theoretical one. According to Lindemann, incremental model of decision-making process involves continuously building out from the current situation, step by step and by some degree further. Now, Lindemann results that the past activities and experience are used by the decision makers to make future decisions. It is also known as branch technique or model of successive limited comparison on step-by-step decision-making model. That was the incremental model. Now, characteristics of incremental model were the basic one was the characteristic feature of incremental model as highlighted by Sapru or as follows. First characteristic was it receives to accession of incremental changes. Policy making accept the legitimacy of existing policies because of the uncertainty about the consequences of new or different policies. That was the first characteristic. Second was the involves mutual adjustment and negotiation. This test of a good decision is agreement rather than good achievements. That's incrementalism is significant in reducing political tensions and maintains stability. That is the second characteristic of incremental model. Third was it involves a trial and error method. It is superior to a futile attempt at superhuman comprehensiveness. This research usually brings with the familiar, that is, with policy options close to contemporary policies. That involves the contemporary policies in the government. Fourth characteristics was what I see is not more once for all. Incrementalism is thus more satisfactory from a theoretical point of view, as it scores high on criteria like Persian and simplicity. Now, Limdom and argued that the incremental model is better than rationality model in terms of specifying the alternatives dealing with multiple and conflicting objectives, and further the decision under this model are reflective of the real world. That was the Lindemann's incremental model. Now next was the uh, Z-Stone mixed scanning model. Amitai Zelsoni, in his paper Mixed Scanning, the third approach to decision making, 1967, had evocative the mixed scanning model, certain aspects of fashion model and incremental model, and thus mix the scanning model is the result of combination of certain elements of rational and incremental model. Means some of the elements of rational and incremental model are there in the mixed scanning model. That is why it is called mixed scanning model. According to Zezizov, mixed scanning is a rationalistic approach to decision making, which acquires greater than that was this that the decision makers command. The mixed scanning reduces the realistic aspects of rationalism while limiting its detail required in fundamental decision and help to overcome the conservative slant of incrementalism by exploring long run alternatives. Thus, Eloni that's observed that mixed scanning model is a description of the reality of decision making strategies, and it is also a model for better decision making. Hence, while deciding on a policy endeavor should be to scan key areas fully and nationalistically, and other areas can be looked at in a more qualitative view. That was the mixed scanning model by Eroso. Next model was the Doro's optimal model. Now, Doro, in his book Public Policy Making, examined in 1989, advocated the optimum model of policy making. He rejected the idea of incrementalism approach and suggested alternative to the rational and incrementalist model. Now, Doro claims that optimal model is a superior model to all the other existing models, which is a combination of economically rational model and extra rational model. The following were the characteristic of optimum model. That was by Doro's optimal model. First characteristic was that it is qualitative, not quantitative. It contains both rational and extra rational elements in it. Third was the it basic rational of economically rational. It is basically rational to economically rational concepts. And next was it is concerned with meta policy making. Meta policy making was there in the optimal model. Next, it has much built-in feedback. Feedback was there, much built. building the concepts were there. The optimal model has been classified into three phases: meta policy making, and post policy making. In the three phases, this optimal model was classified. These three phases contains 18 stages of rational and extra rational aspects. Now, what is the first phase of Doro's optimum model? That was the meta policy making. Meta policy making is the mental policy making, is a stage that comes even before a policy is formulated. This is appropriately stage in which measures are taken to understand various aspects related to the policy which is to be formulated, and there are about seven stages in it, in which it includes processing values first, second processing reality, processing problems, surveying, processing, and developing resources. Designing, evaluating, and redesigning the policy making system comes next. Then the allocating problem values and resources was also this stage of the meta policy making stage. Determining policy making stages, strategies was the last thing, so the seventh stage included in the meta policy making stage. Next was the policy making stage, that is the second phase. In the second phase, the policy is actually formulated, which again involves about seven stages. In this phase, the sources are sub allocated for the various processes under policy in hand, and in further involves actual designs of the policy. Right from setting the goals, analyzing the cost and benefits of various alternatives, and thus finally arriving at the best alternatives. The different stages in this phases are as follows. Now, these also have meta post policy making stage, also have the stages. One was sub allocating resources. Next is establishing operational goals with some order of priority, establishing a set of their significant values with some order of priority, a set of major alternative policies, including some good ones. Next was preparing reliable predictions of the significant benefits and cost of the various alternatives. Comparing the predicted benefits and cost of various alternatives and identifying the best one was the next stage of policy making. Last was the evaluating the benefits and cost of the best alternative and deciding whether they are good or not. That was the policy making stage. Then the post policy making stage. This is the final phase in which the policy which is formulated is floated around, and it again involves various stages right from the deciding on how the policy should be executed, then actual process of execution, evaluating the after effects of executing it, and finally taking corrective measures by reflecting on the feedback received in strengthening the policies. The stages involved in the third phase are as follows. That first stage was motivating the execution of policy, how we can execute the policy. Next was executing the policy, then evaluating policy making after executing the policy. Communication and feedback channels interconnecting all the phases. These were the stages. First, we have to motivate how he could execute the policy, that is the propaganda or ads or whatever. Now, executing the policy, then evaluating the policy, whatever the after including the executing the policy, so it was to be evaluated. Then the communication and feedback channels interconnecting all the phases. That's the best example that can be given for the Doro's model of policy making is the new education policy. Now, this new education policy is the best example of Doro's model of policy making, which is getting drafted from 2015 onwards. The above 18 stages of Doros on the combination of core element of the rational model and extra rational factors. Doros' view on decision making is thus to improve the rational content of the government. This was the Doros rational model. Next was scholars were the Michael Coren, James Marsh, and John Collins, 1972, formulated the garbage can model of decision making, in which the focus was on organizational decision making. This approach described the behavior of institutions as organized anarchies. This approach is considered realistic as it has the capability of producing the active decision instead of proactive decisions. According to the garbage can model, an organization is a collection of choices looking for problems, issues, and feeling looking for decision situation, in which they might be ill solutions looking for issues to which they might be the answers. The decision makers looking for work. This model does not consider decision making as a sequence of activities that brings with the problem and ends with the solution. In garbage can model, there are three streams. One is the problem, second is the solution and participation. And in this model, there are solutions searching for problem and participant floating about looking for a way to participate in putting together these problems and solution. Thus, in this model, all the stream problems, solutions, and decision participations are mixed together. That is the garbage can model by Coren, James March, and John Ollis. That was formulated in 1972. That was the garbage can model. Now we will further move on to the system and socio-psychological approaches. That is the Unit 7 in Block 2. Now Unit 7 is system and psychological approaches. That is, it is a modern organization witnesses vast growth in size, complexity, and scale of activity as the level of complexity and scale of operational increase. It becomes increasingly necessary to develop a conceptual basis to integrate them within a framework. In this unit, we are going to study the theories that fall under two approaches, namely a system approach and second is the social psychological approaches. These two approaches view organization as a system and social psychological system that emphasizes wholesome and not merely focus on a single part of an organization. There are many propounded two things that fall under these two approaches. Among them, they are going to be explained the views of Christian Bernard under the system approach and Abraham Maslow hierarchy of needs, Frederick Herzl and Douglas McGirt under the socio-psychological approach. Now we will go by the system approach. First is the system approach. An overview of a system approach. A system is defined as the set of distinct elements, components that interact to form a complex whole. The whole is not just the sum of the part of the system itself, but it can be explained only as a totality. Thus, nothing can be explained by isolating a component on a system. A system processes inputs and outputs. Therefore, inputs into the outputs. Whatever we give, we will get back. Therefore, each system consists of boundaries, components, interaction between components, inputs, and outputs. In this dynamic relationship with its environment, it receives various inputs, transforms these inputs in some way, and exports outputs. It is depicted in the diagram that shows there in the system theory. That input, first we put input the process, then it goes on the process, then output, then feedback, and that is merged in the environment. In this system theory, concept of feedback is important in understanding how a system maintains a steady state, e.g., a dynamic equilibrium information concerning the outputs or the process of this system is feedback as an input into the system, perhaps leading to change in the transformation process and or future outputs. In administrative analysis, the system approach is being widely used in recent years. Here you would study Bernard's conceptualization of organization as cooperative system. Before that, we will attempt to understand the organization as a system. Organization as a system, in this system approach, view organization as a system that lays emphasis on wholesome and not merely a single part. Component organization as a system is made up of several subsystems or parts or components that are interrelated and interdependent for their functioning. This external environment of an organization is called a subtrasystem, which comprises economic, social, and political organization. Organization is an open system and it consequently interacts and exchange matter with its environment. In this interaction, it takes input and environment processes the revised input. Now, input in the form of outputs which are then exported back into the environment. Defining an open system with respect to organization, Thompson has observed that the complex organization is a set of interdependent blocks which together make up a whole because each contributes something and receives something from the whole, which in turn is interdependent with some large environment. A system is a cyclic process and that survives from continuous input, transformation, and output processes. There are three types of inputs that an organization takes from its suprasystem. That is, first is the raw material, second the energy, and third information. The inputs are converted into outputs through men and machine. The organization exports the output created through the process of conversion. The output are given back to the environment for importing further inputs. Now, the system approach as viewed by the Christian Bernard. Christian Bernard, 1886 to 1961, was an American business executive, public administrator, and the author of pioneer work in management theory and organizational studies. His writings had the important impact on the human organization. His analysis of management took the form of a social system approach. In determining the task of executive, he analyzed the nature of cooperative social system and found non-logical factors also influencing human behavior in an organization. So the major contribution of Christian Barnard were as follows. First was the theory of organization. Christian Bernard regards as organization as a system that is subordinate to the large system society. He views organization as a social system. He has defined organization as a system of consciously coordinating activities of forces of two or more people. According to Bernard, initial existence of structure depends upon three elements. First was the willingness of person to contribute effort to the cooperative system. Second is the an objective of cooperation. Next was the proper communication system. But not 1938 distinguished between formal and informal organization. He defined informal organization as the aggregate of personal contact and interactions and the association grouping of people. Both the formal and informal organization need each as they are interdependent aspects of the same phenomena. Next theory was the organizational equilibrium. According to Bernard's organization is a cooperative system made up of individual humans with individual motivation. He maintains that cooperation originates in the need of an individual to accomplish purposes. Organization, it will be described as the balance achieved between the contribution of members of an organization and return contribution made by the organization to the fulfillment of the individual goals of the members. Bernard has also viewed the concept of efficiency and effectiveness. When an individual in an organization seeks to achieve ends sought by the organization, then his activity could be identified as effective. Thus, there must be initial equilibrium as well as it will be in between the system and environment. Next was the acceptance theory of authority. Bernard subscribed to the acceptance theory of authority, according to which managerial authority rests on the constant of subordinates. This is in contrary to the traditional view of top to bottom approach of right to command and order and give it to bottom up interpretation. According to him, authority involves two aspects, uh, subjective and objective. The subjective aspect is personal. The acceptance of a communication is authoritative. A person will accept an order and authoritative only when four conditions are met. One, the communication is understandable. The receiver believes the instruction is consistent with the organizational purpose. Then the receivers believe it is compatible with his or her personal interest. Then the receiver is both mentally and physically able to comply. The objective characteristic of communication of authority is that aspect which includes acceptance. The character of authority in organizational communication lies in the potentiality of asserts of those who will they be sent. The second was the system of communication is the primarily and continuing problem of a formal organization. They are controlling factors in the characteristic of communication system as a system of objective authority. Now, zone of difference. The zone of difference in Bernard's 1948 tribunal contribution, according to Bernard, every individual has a zone of indifference. It is like Simon's zone of acceptance. It implies that a person will accept order within and without question as long as they fall within his zone. The zone may be wider or narrow depending upon the degree to which individual commitment or to the organization and to which the inducement succeed the burdens and sacrifices associated with compliance with a specific order. He has observed in all the order of action responsible, practicable. We arrange in the order of their acceptability to the person affected in many B, then see that there are a number which are clearly unacceptable, that is, which certainly will not be waived. The functions of the executive. The vitality and endurance of an organization depends on the functions of the executive. According to Bernard, the essential executive functions are first to maintain the system of communication necessary for a cooperation to be coordinated, to promote and secure essential efforts, to formulate and define the purpose for organization. The first function of maintenance of this system of the authority has two components. Defining the organization position means beginning of the personal system. That was the functions of the executive in the Bernard system approach. Now we will move on to the next approach in this unit is the social psychological approach. Now, social psychological approach is a tool to understand the theories that recognize the organization as a social psychology system with emphasis on the human side. It is the applications of behavioral science such as psychology, sociology, and anthropology to the study of human side of organization. Proponent of social psychological approach believe that individuals play a vital role in this success or the failure of the organization. A belief in human beings and their contribution to organization is centered to this approach. It emphasizes on time, needs, drive, behavior, and attitude of individual. It helps to understand why individual behavior as they do and what psychological and social factor influence them. It and a manager to the identify to motivate, which influence the behavior of the employee at work to attain organizational objective. That is the social psychological approach. Now, social psychological approach, uh, Abraham Maslow is the father of humanistic psychology. Maslow's motivation theory is one of the best known and most influential theories on workplace motivation. This is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory. According to Maslow, human being is an organism which derives into action to satisfy its need. The fundamental principles behind his hierarchy of need is that people are born with certain needs. The fulfillment of basic needs will allow to move towards and fulfill other more complex needs. The pattern of hierarchy of needs act as a major determinant in individual adjustment within an organization. By understanding the needs of the human being, the manager can motivate them towards organizational goals with appropriate intervention strategies. The first last level of need is psychological need. These are most proponent need for sustaining human life itself. Breath, thirst, hunger, sleep, and biological satisfaction are the psychological needs without which the people cannot survive. Second comes the need for safety, comprised of security, stability, dependency, protection, freedom from fear, anxiety, and chaos. Need this structure, order, law and limit, and so on. Third level of need are the love and belonging needs, which in the word of Maslow involves giving and receiving affection. The hierarchy of need is depicted in the figure below. Need for self actualization, the esteem needs, achievements, recognition, dignity, love and belongingness need, giving and receiving affection, need for safety, security, stability, freedom from fear, etc. is the fourth need. Psychological need, breath, thirst, hunger, sleep, etc. Fourth level of needs, the esteem need, which involves self-worth of esteem and the esteem of other. Maslow notes that it involves the desire for strength, achievements, adequate mastery and competence, confidence in the face of the world, independence and freedom. The fifth level of needs are the need for self-actualization. This entails maximizing one's potential and to accomplishing something, according to Maslow's definition of self actualization. That's why analyzing the needs and its potential to motivate human beings, Maslow's theory helped to understand the behavior of human being. This theory helps the manager to understand how to motivate the human being towards the desired organizational goals. Next was the Douglas McGeorge theory X and theory Y. Douglas McGeorge was an American social psychologist. He proposed his famous X and Y theories in his book The Human Side of Enterprise 1960. He opined that the core leadership assumption, theory X and theory Y, will assist the leader to question their underlying assumptions and perceptions about people. Major believed that ask companies become more competitive because of technological advancement, the success of organization would be more dependent on the dynamic of the people. John believed that giving importance to human side of management and leadership is a fundamental requirement for the success of organization. He was of the strong opinion that leaders could behave in a way that would result in high organization commitment for their subordinates. The assumptions behind theory X were employee in an organization were lazy and did not work. Employee wanted to work as little as possible and tended to avoid it. Employee was self-centered and non-committal to organizational needs. Employees were not intelligent and creative, avoiding responsibilities and were reluctant to change. Employee preferred to be directed by the higher officials. Because of the other above assumptions, leaders subscribed to this theory would closely supervise, direct, and control their employee, and also use cohesive factors like external stimuli to get them driven towards organizational goals. The assumption behind theory Y were as follows: the employee treated their work as natural and enjoyed working, and the environment was suitable. Employees were intelligent, imaginative, and creative. Employee gladly accepted autonomy or responsibility and even actively sought it. Employees agree with the goals of the organization and put self-control and self-direct towards them. Employee demonstrated an actively creative and innovative approach towards the challenge of the organization. Because of the above assumptions, leader of this theory, well understanding constructions, participative, result oriented, and effective. In the Y theory, Meg George also spoke the transaction expert of power and influence. This concept of transactions influence has been of great relevance. According to Sachin, there is nothing in this story that says that the manager should believe in any particular manner. Despite all the criticism leveled against McGeorge's theory, his idea have made a significant contribution to the field of management. Perhaps the most important is how organization view the employee. The next was the another prominent thinker who contributed can be viewed through social psychological approach is Friedrich Herzberg. Now, Friedrich Herzberg's two-factor theory, he has tried to understand employee attitudes and motivation by determining the factors in an employee's work environment that cause satisfaction or dissatisfaction. His studies included interview in which employees was asked what pleased and displeased them about their work. Herzberg found that the factors causing job satisfaction about different from those causing job dissatisfaction. He developed three motivation how to explain these results. He not only satisfied motivator, they are dissatisfied the hygienic factor using the term hygienic in the sense that they are considered maintenance factor that necessary to avoid dissatisfaction, but that they themselves do not provide satisfaction. Herbert's two-factor theory is this dissatisfier and motivation factors. In the dissatisfier, Herbert observed that satisfaction and dissatisfaction are two different set of factors and cannot be treated as opposite to one another. It means opposite of satisfaction is not dissatisfaction, but rather no satisfaction. Herbert had argued that satisfier and his satisfier are two distinct human needs, and then we add under psychological need of human beings, respectively. In order to motivate his life for long term and satisfying individual needs, Herbert has the distinct job enrichment and job loading by job investment. He meant that the job should be challenging enough to utilize employees' ability. If an employee cannot be designed to use employees' full ability, then the firm should consider automating the task to replacing the employee with one who has a lower level of skill. If a person cannot be fully utilized, then there will be a motivative problem. Now, critics have argued that job satisfaction does not necessarily imply a high level of motivation or productivity also. This theory ignores blue collar workers. Despite this limitation, Herbert's factory is broadly accepted in management and administration. Therefore, the Herbert's two-factor theory, in which mostly the stress was given to the satisfying worker, and this what are the factors, what are the motivation factors needed for the to gain a satisfied worker. That is company policy and administration, supervisors, salary, interpretation of relations, working conditions, uh, give the workers a dissatisfying approach. Next, if they give the motivation factor, that is the achievement, recognitions, work itself, responsibility, if given to the worker, advancement, increment, all these are the motivation factors needed to satisfy a worker. Now we had in now we will go through the social psychological approach. That is the we have gone through two of the approaches in this chapter: the system approach and the social psychological approaches. Um, Namely, system approach we had studied. We will just go through the block once again, this unit once again. System and psychological approach, we'll just go through it. This system, we have already said that system approach is the input given and to processes, and whatever the output is there, then to get the feedback and to merge it with the environment is the uh, system approach. That was then how the organization as the system, how system approach is organized, that we had gone through. That is input in the form of output, which are then exported back into the environment. Defining an open system with respect to organization. That was observed by Thomson. That was the system approach. Now, in this second block, we had gone through uh, two models, if we say, rather three models, we can say. First was the human relation approach. Uh, in this block 2, behavioral system and social psychological perspective. First, we had gone through the human relation approach uh, during the period of 1924 to 1927 by Mayo. Uh, these human relation studies were done by experiments by Mayo. By Mayo. Uh, that was the relay assembly experiment, interviewing program, bank wiring observation room, significance, and all. That was the experiment done by Eton Mayo of in human relation approach to get the significance of uh, the study. Next, we had gone through the decision making approach, that is considered the important process for an organization. Decision making approach was by defined by Christian Bernard. In decision making approach, there were types of decisions that was programmed. First type was programmed and non-programmed decision. Second was organizational and personal decision. Third, genetic and unique decision. Fourth, routine and strategic decision. Fifth was the policy and operating decision. That was there in the types of decision making. Decision making process, how the decision making is done, that was by Terry 1956. He determined the first include the process decision making process, which includes determining the problem, acquired general background information and viewpoints about the problem, state what appeared to be the best course of action, investigation and proposal of tentative decision, evaluating tentative decision, making the decision and output and put it to effort, and institution follow up and if necessary modify decision in the light of result obtained. That was the process of decision making. Simon in March 1960 asserted that there were four set of activities which was important in decision making process: intellectual intelligence activity, design activity, choice activity. Fourth was the evaluating activities. First three process of decision making was stipulated by fourth process, namely evaluating activities, which was later added later in the collaboration work of Jane S. March and Simon. On the whole, it can be summed up that this decision making process in itself is a complex exercise and has asserted by Simon it involves technical and political determinants in the process of decision making. Each stage is important in arriving at the final decision. Now, models of decision making, one was the Simon's bounded rationality model, in which various types of decisions should be taken: objectively rational, subjectively rational, consciously rational, deliberately rational, occasionally rational, personally rational. There were many factors included there: the time and cost contained, environmental focus, external, dynamic matters of objectives, imperfect information, as well as limited capacity to process the available information. That was the Simon's bounded model. Next was the Lindman's incremental model. Uh, a result that the past activities and experience are used by the decision maker to make future decision. It is also known as branch technique or model of successive limited comparison on step-by-step decision making model. That was the Lindman's incremental model. Next was the Ethology mixed scanning model, in which he observed that mixed scanning model is the description of the reality of decision making strategy, and it is also a model for better decision making. Hence, while deciding on policy endeavor should be scanned by key areas fully in nationality, and other areas can be looked at it in a more prudent view. That was the mixed scanning model. Doro's optimal model. The optimal model has been classified into three phases: meta policy making, and next was the policy making, and post policy making. Meta policy making stages has seven stages in it. Policy making stages, that is the second phase of policy, is actually formulated with again involves seven stages of phases. Now, the post policy making stages, the stages involved in the third phase, in which motivation, executive policy, executing the policy, evaluating policy making after executing the policy, communication and feedback challenge, interconnection, all phases were there in the post policy making. Now, another model was the coalition march and or Olison garbage can model. This model does not consist in decision making as a sequence of activities that begins with the problem and ends with the solution. In garbage can model, there are three stages: problem, solution, and participation. And in this model, there are solution searching for problems and participant floating about looking for a way to participate in putting together these problems and solutions. Next, in the seventh unit, system psychological approach. System approach we have gone through. System approach. The system theory concept of feedback is important, and understanding how the system maintains a steady state, e.g., dynamic equilibrium information concerning the outputs of the process of the system is to feedback as an input into the system. Organization as a system approach where organization as a system that lays emphasis on a wholesome and not merely a single part component. Organization as a system is made up of several subsystem or parts or components that are interrelated and interdependent for their functioning. System approach view by Christian Bernard. The theory of Christian Bernard, his contribution was First was the theory of organization. Next was the organizational equilibrium. Then acceptance theory of authority, objective characteristic, zone of difference, and the function of the executive. These were the contribution by Chester Bernard in the social psychological approach. Now, in the social psychological approach, the which was approached under the theories of recognition and organization as a social psychological system, which emphasize on the human side of its application. In the social psychological approach, that is the last approach in this block, was the Maslow's hierarchy of need theory, Douglas McClure's theory X and theory Y. We had discussed this and we have gone through Herbert's two-factor theory. These were the three theories in the social psychological approach. With this, we end with the block 2 of our we have discussed the with block 2 behavioral system social psychological perspective. Uh, in the next class, we will go through the uh, third block and we'll study the other approaches that are there in the third block. In the two blocks, in this in the first block and in the second block, I am just repeating it again that in first block we have covered the scientific management approach, administrative approach, bureaucratic approach. These three approaches we have covered in the first block. Now, in the second block, we have covered human relation approach, decision making approach, social system approach, and social psychological approach. These are the approaches we have so far covered. In total, we have covered in two blocks we have covered around 6 approaches. Okay, first, first, and these approaches we have gone through in detail. In third block also we will cover some more approaches in the next class.